All right, so the purpose of this video is part two of the rocker assembly for the 1977 MGB. Um, and just to recap real quick, the 77 uses an offset oiler hole, but the head that I have has an inline oiler hole. So what I ended up doing was I bought a new assembly. I said new. It's I bought an assembly off of eBay. It's a used assembly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a way to make one good assembly out of the two of these. So each one has their own strengths and weaknesses. In this case, if you recall, because the last one had the wrong pedestal here for the oiler, all the oil was coming out and it wasn't going across the top and getting oiled, and so a lot of the components were oil starved and had a lot of wear on them. The one that I bought from eBay was obviously in a car that was left out, and there's a lot of corrosion across some of the non-wear areas. So I don't think I'm going to use the shaft on this one because I just don't like this pitting and corrosion on here. The reason why the pitting on the non-wear areas is important is if you'll see on the shaft here, this is the screw hole that, if you can see right here, this little screw right here screws in and it captures the shaft with that screw right there, right? So this is a little bit bigger, but completely opposite. This is the oil inlet hole, right? The only thing difference between this side and this side is the size of that hole. And there's absolutely no reason why having that hole a little bit bigger to let a little more oil in, I don't think it would make a difference. But the only thing about this hole is that it's smaller. And so what I'm going to be doing, if you look at this, there's a very distinct wear pattern on the shaft. Let's see if I can get a little closer here. You can see on one side there's a lot of wear where the rockers roll back and forth, but you roll it 180 degrees, there's almost no wear. I mean, there's nothing. That is spotless and smooth. And the reason why is, if you look at the way that the rockers, the way they work, on this side there's a valve. Okay, there's a valve. You've got a valve. This is the intake valve, and that valve is spring-loaded to push up against the rockers, right? And then on the other side over here, this side is pushed. It's pushed upwards by the cam. Every time that the cam pushes it, it pushes the valve down. That's how that mechanism works. Well, if you can see there, it's a up pressure here and a up pressure here, and so what ends up happening is only this bottom part of the bushing has any wear because it's pushing up on both ends, and nothing puts pressure down on the top. So the shaft, as it is, the top side of the shaft here gets no wear because there's no up pressure on that. It's only the bottom side of the shaft that gets the wear. So if I turn this 180 degrees and I drill this hole big enough so that this capture screw can capture it, I will in effect have a brand new shaft because I'm going to use the other half of the shaft that's not being worn. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this on the drill press, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that it will work with that screw, and I'm going to invert it. And I've gone ahead and drawn, this is not rust, this is a brown marker, and I've drawn on both ends and on the screw here, so I know that will go down. So once I have them both, I don't want to lose track of which one's up. So in this case, the brown will go down. It rhymes, so it's a good mnemonic for me. So anyway, yeah, brown goes down, and that's how that will work. Okay, so like I was saying, the 74 versus the 77, each one has some strengths and weaknesses. So the strength of the 74 is that it's older. Believe it or not, the older parts had more care for oiling. And you can see on here, this is the tappet that goes into the rocker here. It would normally be screwed in right in here. And on the 74, you can see it has a little groove here with an oiler, and the oiler actually puts oil right out onto the push rod, on the tip of the push rod. Whereas on the 77, you'll see that groove is missing altogether. And there is no oil hole that goes to the push rod. So it kind of depends on just circumstantial oil dripping down into that to get into that push rod. And you can see how shiny this one is because of wear versus this one that was oiled. There's almost no wear on that. So I'm going to call that an advantage. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these rockers and I'm going to evaluate the bushings for wear. And I think these are better. These are actually the 77 bushings. And I'm going to find which ones are better to, and I've already checked. These holes on the 77 are active and they go through. You can see, I don't know if I can get it close enough. You can see there's a hole right in there. And that hole is fed oil from that hole right there. And that is fed from the shaft. So as the shaft oils the rockers, the oil will go out and get down in, and it'll oil the actual push rod. And the more oil that you have as a buffer, the quieter the valve chain is going to be. And obviously, the more oil that you have in any of these wear surfaces, it's going to rob less horsepower with friction. So I'm using these on all of the push rods, and all of the rocker arms are going to be switched out. Either I'm going to use one of the ones from the 77, whether it has a good bushing or it has good wear surface. I'm going to get into that right now. And we're going to get them all to the point where I like them the way they are. And this has the proper pedestal. And so between the two, I think I'm going to be able to put together a good set. So let's go into other things that would make these a pro or a con, which one I would like. This was one of the rocker arms from the 77 that was oil starved. And let's see if I can get this close enough. You can see right on here how there's a cupping in here. The valve had been sitting in here and it's been rubbing, right? And what it's done over time, because these valves are pretty hard metal, is it's created a cup in here. It's no longer flat. Well, as you know, the way that you adjust the valves is you put a feeler gauge in here. Like you would take a feeler gauge like this and set it to whatever it is, and then you would put a feeler gauge in there and you would feel what it is, right? You adjust that gap with a feeler gauge and you'd be able to determine, what that feeling is. Well, if there's a cup, then you're not going to get a good reading because the feeler gauge is flat. Here, let me put it on a little magnifying glass. All right, so if you were to take a measurement, let's see if I can get a good view of this from here. From here, and you try to put a feeler gauge in there, you'll see that there's a gap. There you go. There's a gap between them. That gap is enough to make a difference that your reading will be wrong, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to either grind these off to make them flat again, or I'll pick one from over here that has a flatter surface. You see, that's a lot flatter. There's not a lot of wear on these. So, and that's all the difference that having oil makes. And this is an older car or an older piece, but it had been oiled properly. All right, so these are the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to make this hole bigger so that it can work like this hole did. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to use the back side. I'm going to go through each one of these and I'm going to evaluate the bushing on the inside and the wear surface up here. and either make this flat or use the other one if it's appropriate. And then I'm going to replace every one of these from the 77 with one of these from the 74, so I can have positive oiling on the push rod ball itself. So that's the plan. All right, there you go. All drilled out, just like the back side. I even put a little bit of a chamfer on it to make it easy. And I've already dry fit this little peg that goes in. And it turns the right number of revolutions, so it ends up in this direction. So that's all perfect. All right, so I'm going to start working through these rocker arms and cleaning them up and grinding these flat. And then we'll check back in when I get started with the assembly. All right, so let me explain the setup here. The goal here is to remove the cupping to make sure that this surface is absolutely flat. Right? We don't want to have any kind of cupping in here. We want to have a nice flat surface so that when we measure it with a feeler gauge, we don't get any kind of false reading. So the trick here is to make sure that this is perpendicular. We don't want to make it askew. So I'm not gonna freehand it. What I've done here is I've got a piece of plate steel, and I've extended my bed on my grinder out to the side here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rely on the flatness of this surface. Now, this surface right here is perpendicular to the shaft, so I mean it's pretty reliable. I don't see any burrs or anything on here, so I think that that's going to be a very reliable surface. The idea here is I'll be able to put this flat surface here right onto that, and by having an extension beyond it, I can work in that plane only, and that will make sure that as I grind this, it's going to only grind it perpendicular to the shaft. And what I've done on this, just to make sure that I get that, is I've adjusted this angle down here and confirmed it with the square to make sure that I am in fact perpendicular and that everything is all copacetic. So let's get grinding. Little bits at a time, but you can see the difference right in there. Not putting a lot of pressure on it. Closer. little bits at a time. Okay, I think we're about there. One little nick right there, but I think we're golden. So that's the objective, and you can see on here. Let me see if I get nice and close. There we go. You can see that this is probably better than original manufacturing, because you see up here that it was off center anyway. The actual surface where it's going to hit is just kind of right in this area, right in here. And I didn't take as much off as, you can still see there's a little bit of a shiny spot right there. The idea being I don't want to go too far and then I'll lose track of how far it was. But that's a good reference right there, and I'm very pleased with that. So rinse and repeat. We got, 2 more valves for for each cylinder, so I got to do this 7 more times. Okay, got them all ground down. You can see it's kind of weird. There's some irregular shapes on some of these casting defects and whatnot. You can see there's some of them just came out as a triangle. They didn't come flat. But they're true and square now, and not going to have any cupping. This one right here, I was unable to get the screw off. This little tappet end. I was able to get these the bolts off, the nuts, and that's the weird thing. I can get this nut off, but here's the thing. Whoever had this before me decided in his infinite wisdom to put thread locker on these threads the last time that they adjusted the threads on these. Just so that everybody understands, the reason why we have to adjust these is not because the adjustment is like the screws don't get loose and get out of adjustment. The reason why you have to adjust these every 10,000 miles or 1 year is that there's a lot of wear points. You got the ball here, you got the tappets, you got the push rods, you have this with banging on the valves. There's a lot of places where metal will wear away, and you have to adjust them periodically. It's not because they came out of adjustment, because the screws came out of adjustment. So don't ever put thread locker on your rocker arm adjusting screws. That is just idiocy. So if you did that, you know who you are, and go correct that, because you need to be able to adjust these periodically, and thread locker is not the way to do that. So anyway, this one has the threads got a little screwed up, so we decided that I'm just going to clean up the bushing nicely on this one, and we'll use the old rocker arm on the configuration for this one. But all the others we got able to clean. I had to use the nuts from the newer one that doesn't have thread locker, because the nuts were all clogged up with thread locker. But we have enough nuts and we have enough screws, and this is just another really good example of the difference between these two. You can see they got a hole here that feeds a hole through to the end. Oops, there's a hole in the end here, and they have a hole in the middle right here that feeds through that. So we're using these, and we're not using these, because these don't have a hole and they don't lubricate the ends. So that'll make it so that we have a lot quieter valve train if we can get that oil to run through and do all the lubricating that it needs to do. All right, so that's the last little comment here before I start the reassembly on this project. Let me show you real quick the springs that we're going to use on these. Oh, what's the other one? Here it is. So on the 77, the end springs were really badly gouged, and you know, anytime you remove material from a spring, it makes them less springy. So we're not going to use the springs on this one, but the springs on the older one have very minimal wear, and so these are going to work really well. So I think that we're between the two of these, we're going to get a really good set out of them, and we'll have the advantage of the better oiling. So on to the reassembly here, and then we'll finish up. Okay, there you go, all assembled. Again, got a cotter pin. Let's make sure that it's bent. Got a cotter pin here that's been bent at the end. It has a washer. There's a little spring that goes in right in here before the first rocker. This is the primary pedestal where the oil goes in from the engine, and this is inline, so that's one of the major things that we changed. You can see that we've got all these surfaces have been resurfaced, so they're nice and flat. There's no cupping, so we can get a good measurement when we do gap those. The other thing I want to mention here is that you know, when you start your engine for the first time, you got to make sure that everything that you put together has assembly lube in there, because you don't want these to run unoiled. So every single one of the points where any of these rockers are on, they have I've put some assembly lube in there. And so the other advantage that we're taking advantage of here is these little holes here where the push rods go. The older ones had the holes, and so we leveraged those in as well. So this is the final assembly on the rocker assembly on a 1977 MGB. It has a head that has the larger valves in it. I'll put a note to what the actual spec is to that in the details. And it has a inline as opposed to in the 77 it actually had an offset oiler, so we don't have the offset oiler on this head, and so that's going to be a really good thing for us as well there. All right, so hope this video outlines for you something that I think gets ignored. It's an assembly that can steal a lot of horsepower if you don't pay attention to it, and hopefully some of these little tips and tricks help somebody to increase the performance and reliability of their vehicle, as well as the valve timing. So if you like this video, please comment and subscribe, and share it around with all your friends. Cheers.